Okay, I think we're live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I hope you can hear me. And we begin. We begin chapter 16 of our Catechism class in the section of Life in Christ. So last week we began a new section in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which has to do with how we live. How do we shape our lives, and how do we make our decisions according to the teachings and commandments of God, teachings of Jesus. And so I kind of explained why the law of God is so important and why we are bound to live according to God's law, which governs the whole world, but in a very unique way. It is meant to govern us on our journey towards holiness, on our journey towards union with God and with one another. And just to tie some loose ends off from last time, I think it's important for us to, before we get into the 10 Commandments, which we will talk about today, we will begin our discussion on the 10 Commandments. I just want to mention some principles in how one makes a decision in moral theology, in the way we follow God's law. And so the principle is very simple. We always avoid evil and we do good. So that's those are the two sides of the same coin that constitute how we're supposed to live as moral Christians, as people who follow God's moral law. We try to avoid sin, but we don't want our whole life to be just a life of avoiding sin. We also want to say not just no to sin, but also yes to that which is good. And so our whole life is supposed to be responding to those two sides of the same coin, saying, as Jesus said, turn away from sin and be faithful to the gospel, to the good news that I bring to you. So turn away from sin, turn towards the gospel, turn towards Jesus, towards God. And so the same in our moral life, we always have to make sure that we are not doing bad things, but simply trying to do good things. So that's as simply as we can put it. Avoid sin or reject sin, fight against sin, and try to grow in virtue in being a person who pursues doing good things according to the teachings of our faith. And sometimes I think we have to understand that avoiding sin and growing in virtue are actually, it's the same movement. It's the same action. It's not that we spend half of our life avoiding sin, and then once we've overcome all the sin, then we begin to live and doing good things. But actually, doing good things will keep us too busy to do the bad ones. And so one way of overcoming sin is by being busy doing the right thing. So we overcome sinful activity by being busy trying to grow in the virtuous activity. And we'll talk more about that as we go along, because with each of the commandments, we will see that also two sides of the same coin, if you will. That each commandment says to us, thou shalt not, which is a principle of don't do this. This is bad. This is a sin. But what we also interpret from that is the opposite of that then must be good, which must be what we should be doing. And so that's always important to do, that Our faith is not simply about saying no. Our faith is about doing both, saying no to sin and yes to virtue and to grace, to God. So we must not do evil is one principle. The other one is we must try our best not to participate in evil. And so this can be a little bit more tricky. But if we can help it, we can't always help it, but if we can help it, we don't want to have any participation, material or formal participation in evil acts. Now, why do I say sometimes it's impossible? Because we live in a world that's broken. And so you could say, well, by paying my taxes, I am subsidizing not only the good things that the government does, but also the morally bad things that the government does. And so whether I want to or not, I'm participating both in the good but also in the bad. So in some ways, it's very difficult in our day and age to completely be free of participation in evil. Indirect even participation, especially indirect participation. Or if I buy this shirt or buy a certain product, and I know that the company that makes that product is doing something that's unethical and that's wrong, well, I should try my best not to support this product. But if I have no other choices, if every manufacturer of that kind of product, which is essential for our life here right now, let's say those who make phones, flip phones, not flip, smartphones these days. Let's say if you investigate every one of those companies and find that all of them have questionable dealings and immoral things that they do in the kinds of movements that they support, for example. Sometimes it's just not possible. But it's always important to distinguish when I can, when it's possible. I don't want to participate in other people's or other companies or even the government's participation in evil acts or immoral acts. But as I said, it's very difficult sometimes to get out of that completely as we live in this world and we function in this world. We pay taxes and so on, and we have no... We try to engage in change, but we can't always help it. And so we do our best to not commit evil and to do good, and also to not participate in evil when we can help it, and to participate in the good things. Okay? Very good. So now I want us to go right into the Ten Commandments, because these are still, to this day, the basis for our moral teaching. And you know that the Ten Commandments were given to Moses, and we read about them in the Old Testament in the book of Exodus and also repeated in the book of Deuteronomy. And these were given to the Jewish people as they were escaping their slavery in Egypt on the way to the Promised Land. Remember that this is a type of what would happen later through the salvific work of Jesus. What happened to the Jewish people was simply a preparation or a typology, something that pointed towards the fullness of freedom that we have received in the work of Jesus. And so Jesus takes the Ten Commandments and he actually encourages people to follow them. And that's why we keep following them, because they were endorsed by Christ himself. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 19, a rich young man comes and asks Jesus a question: "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus responds, "Keep the commandments and you will have life." Keep the commandments. And then Jesus says to him, "Come, follow me." And even in that chapter, Jesus also names the commandments, and when he names them, he names the 10 commandments. Now, we know that the number 10 was was attributed to those commandments given to Moses later on in the history of the Jewish people, but not at the time. At the time, it was just a series of commandments that were given to Moses. So the number 10 is not that significant, but we have numbered them. It's come out of that tradition. The numbers were given so that it would be easier to remember. And the idea was that the commandments were given by God through Moses to the Jewish people. Why? So that they would know how to properly order their lives. Remember, moral life, the law of God is for one purpose: to properly order ourselves towards God and towards one another. Proper ordering of our life is essential for us in order to achieve our end, to not only walk the right path, but to know where we're going and to get there. And so the law of God, the Ten Commandments, are a way of properly ordering our relationships. Remember, it all goes back to relationships. Healing our relationship with God and with one another as human beings. And with one another, that also includes with the world, with nature, with the way we live and take care of this world, in the way we relate to one another. So all of our relationships have to be healed, and the way God teaches us to do that is through the Ten Commandments, and Jesus actually summarizes those Ten Commandments with the two commandments which are given in Exodus chapter 34. And they are, sorry, not Exodus. In Matthew chapter 22, Jesus says, love God with your whole mind, your soul, your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So already we can say the commandments of God are not supposed to be extremely difficult and complicated. The best way to think of them is to love God and to love my neighbor. Just like we make the sign of the cross, it's the vertical relationship between heaven and me, so God and me, and horizontal relationship between me and other people. And so that sign of the cross is also, it helps us to remember that our love has to be upward and also all around us. We cannot love one another without properly ordering ourselves towards God, and we cannot truly love God unless we love one another. But the main question here is, what is love? This is where we get ourselves into trouble quite a bit, because people interpret or define love in their own way. And so God defines for us what it means to love God and to love one another by giving us actual commandments. Think of it as concrete ways in which God explains what it means to love. Concrete ways. Okay? So, we're diving right in to the first commandment. The first three commandments have to do with loving God, and the last 7 commandments have to do with loving our neighbor. I'll just read the first 3 for you first, and then we'll go into each one separately. Number 1, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no strange gods before me. Okay? Number 2, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And number 3, remember to keep holy the Lord's day. So we have these 3 commandments. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods beside me. You shall not take the name of the Lord in vain, and keep holy the Lord's Day. So those are the three first commandments having to do with practical ways of loving God. Practical ways. So, number 1, you shall not have, I am the Lord your God. It begins, I am the Lord your God. So right away, God in speaking is giving us the authority of this teaching is based on the fact that God himself is giving this commandment. So that's very important to remember. These are not man-made. These are not created by human beings. These come from God himself, and therefore they have the ultimate authority of shaping our lives. You shall not have strange gods before me. Here, in this first commandment, God is saying, if you love me, you will make sure that I am first. There is going to, my relationship with you is going to be unique to every other relationship you have. I will be the only God that you will believe in, that you will hope in, and that you will love. You will have no strange gods before me or beside me. This commandment is given to us out of love. Because not only is God giving us those commandments so that we may know in practical terms how to love, but so that we can also know that God loves us. Why does God not want us to have any strange gods beside him or before him? Because there are no other gods. There is only one God. And if we base our life on following false gods who do not exist, then we will perish. We will waste our life. God, out of love and mercy, is saying to us, I am the only God who exists. Therefore, don't make a mistake of looking for other gods or elevating other things or other beings and making them equal to me. Now, clearly this was given to the Jewish people at the time when they were surrounded by polytheistic religions that believed in many gods. So that's clearly trying to establish that, trying to get out of their system what they experienced in Egypt, and in some ways were influenced by in Egypt, which was what? Polytheism, false gods, worshipping false gods. So that certainly is the case to this day, that we believe in the one God. But also you have to think, okay, this commandment is telling me the two sides of the same coin. Okay, so it's telling me what not to do, not to believe in strange gods. What is it implying that I do? Well, it's implying that I believe in one God. That I believe in one God. And so here the church calls to mind the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. That not only are we to make sure that we don't place anything or anyone at the same level or even worse, higher than God, so that God is the highest object of our faith, of our attention, of our service, but that we also properly order our lives in relation to God. First, by believing in him. Second, by trusting in him. And third, by loving him. So these are very important: faith, hope, and love, that we continue to grow in these three virtues. And even in our prayer to say, Lord, I believe in you. The Catechism lists sins, possible sins, that can be committed against these three virtues. So faith is our belief in God and rejection of anything that would be as important to us as God. And sins against faith that are listed is deliberate doubt, unbelief, heresy, apostasy, and schism. I don't really need to go into great detail about the difference between heresy, apostasy, schism, but basically it's a rejection, some form of rejection of God or of God's teachings or of God's church. Remember, God's church and the teachings that it contains, a rejection of that which belongs to God is an indirect rejection of God as well. So heresy or apostasy or schism have to do with rejecting either one teaching of the church or all the teachings of the church or the hierarchy of the church with the Pope as the ultimate successor of St. Peter and the vicar of Christ. So sins against faith have to do with rejection not only of God, but also that which belongs to God and which is established by God, namely the church's worship, the church's teachings. Hope is our trust, which we place all our trust in God. God is the one who saves us. God is the one who will lead me. I don't become discouraged. Sins against hope that are listed is despair and presumption. Despair. When I say, it's impossible. God could never forgive me, or I can't forgive myself, or what am I going to do, or even suicidal thoughts. That's despair. And so we have to fight against those sins and continue. How do we do it? By renewing our trust in God. When the darkness comes and we don't know what to do and we get discouraged and we get desperate, we say, Lord, I trust in you. I trust in you, not in myself, but in you. And then love, charity. And so the sins against love towards God are indifference, ingratitude, lukewarmness, sloth or laziness in our spiritual observances. And so these kinds of lack of commitment, you could say, to our life of faith would be a sin against our love, which we should have towards God. It's, as I said before, not enough to believe in God. We have to trust in Him. But it's not even enough to trust in Him. We have to love Him. And to love means that I invest myself. I invest myself in my life of faith. And I'll tell you from personal experience, whenever I have difficulties in my life, in my thinking, when I get kind of discouraged and negative and even depressed, it's usually when my commitment to prayer and to study and to my life of faith has diminished. When I move away from God, I reduce my commitment to love, then usually I get swallowed up by my own fears and my own despair, my own distractions, and it's very easy to kind of lose our way that way. So that's the first commandment: to love God, to have faith in God, to believe in God, to have nothing that we would value as much as our God. Our relationship with God has to be first, above my relationship with my spouse, with my children, with anything or anyone in this world. My relationship with God has to be unique. So we didn't get very far today. The second commandment and the third commandment, we'll talk maybe about both of those next week. But keep in mind that all the first three commandments having to do with love of God are practical ways in which we express our love for God. So number one, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no strange gods beside me. That means that God becomes number one in my life. Practically speaking, how do we do that? I go to church, I say my prayers, I offer to God what I can in terms of my time and my devotion, my prayer. All of that is part of fulfilling that commandment. Not only avoiding those things that lead us away from God, like some of the sins I mentioned, like lukewarmness and heresy and those other things, but also being proactive and saying, I need to have I need to show, if someone looks at me, if someone looks at my schedule, they will see that God features prominently in my daily life. That there is a time of prayer and a time of meditation, and that I do spend time with God, and I do care about what God teaches, and I read the scriptures, and I study the faith, and that is not just something accidental, something on top of everything else, but my faith in God, my hope in God, my love of God, is the driving force of my daily life. And we'll see how that is enhanced by the ministry of the church, and how this relationship with one another in the community that Jesus establishes as the church is actually supposed to strengthen our relationship with God as we continue studying these commandments. So thank you very much for joining me today. I wish you a good night, and till next time, God bless. Oh, if there are questions, you can type them. Let's see if I can find them here. You can type them now in the live chat, and I'll wait for a few minutes for your questions. No questions. Okay. Thanks for joining me. Good night.